welcome to everybody who's here today, and particularly to Annabe, who's going to talk to us. This is an exciting program in which we are following the request of United Nations Environmental Assembly and being executed by UNEP, and in this case, the Abidjan Convention, to develop the best practices and strategies for developing national and regional action plans. And the program's structured in such a way as to begin with some sort of background type of information and an appraisal of the problems and where we should be going. And to these ends, we were very fortunate to have Abu Bamba giving the schedule and the situation in the Abidjan Convention countries, all of the member countries, the 22 of them. And in many places, it's really serious in West Africa in terms of the plastic pollution. And then the further context was given by Professor Linda Godfrey, who spoke about the information coming from the Africa Waste Management Outlook, and a really excellent talk in terms of the prospects and of what needs to be done, etc. And then some of these issues were thrown out to a sort of a panel discussion, and very interactive. In fact, we had several hours of questions, both from Linda Godfrey's and from the panel discussion, which is really tremendous. And we took it from there to then begin to look at, well, what are the issues that we need to focus on? And we began to focus at the sort of the beginning of the value chain, the production and the conversion and those sorts of things, given by Dostane representing South Africa and Daniel Turungu, who was representing the view of West Africa. And now we are really fortunate to have Annabe Pretorius to talk to us about plastic polymers. Now, unlike most of us, Annabe studied plastics and polymers at university, and so she started off as a very enthusiastic young plastic fan, knowing about the polymers. And she's arguably the most knowledgeable person in terms of plastic polymers on the continent, certainly the most knowledgeable person that I know. And she can speak a language that most of us don't understand, but she's marvelous insofar as she translates her chemistry and her understanding of not only the chemistry, but the industry into terms that we can all understand. She's a natural teacher and a natural speaker. So it's with great pleasure that I welcome Annabe to take you through some of the polymers and the issues that we need to consider in developing national and regional action plans. So Annabe, a warm welcome, and over to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. And African Marine Network asked me to specifically look at how do we manage waste and how do we manage it differently for different plastics. And as I start putting this together, I realize, you know, it stays a difficult topic. It doesn't matter how many times we talk about it. I mean, this is the reason for us being here today and being on this call, because these are sceneries that we see all the time. They both taken in South Africa, because me being born and bred South Africa, my exposure in the rest of Africa, I was 1 week spent in Ghana, and I was fortunate enough to live right on the coast. And then I had some time in Kenya, Tanzania, but my knowledge of what really happens in Africa is limited. So my perspective from where I'm coming from is predominantly South Africa. And these inland pictures is also quite common. This is taken in Johannesburg, which is quite a distance from the nearest beach, but we know ultimately material make their way to our coast and to the sea. If you spend any time on social media, these are the type of things we see all the time. We get bombarded with messages that plastics is just bad for us. And as an industry and as people caring for our planet and for plastic, in my case, we really need to come up with the best solutions how to deal with it. I'm one of the fortunate people to live in a formal suburb in Johannesburg. And in my case, I can put my bin on the pavement and voila, it's gone by the time I look out again. But if you're in a less formal area, and this is a suburb in Cape Town, where you can see it's pretty informal, these people do not have a bin. And the official statistics for South Africa says that 29% of households, now a household obviously is a dwelling, but there can be 5 people living in there, there could be 1 person living in there. But 29% of all the dwellings in South Africa do not have a removal service, a waste service that comes once a week or once a fortnight. 3% uses a communal refuse dump where they can take their waste if they so wish. And then 2% have some service some of the times. So that could be a truck coming on a certain day of the month and collecting whatever is available in their waste stream. So let's just looking at what happens to that waste. And yes, where I'm living, I trust, and I've actually did follow the route. I have a local council that collects that bin and even the stuff that I put next to the bin, and they take it to a landfill, which I know in the case of Johannesburg is properly managed. If I was living in an area where I don't have that service, one option could be that I can go and dump it, or even a contractor that's working for the council might choose not to take it to landfill, but just drop it somewhere. There is also a possibility, like the slide I've just shown, that the people just put it out of sight in the nearest river or riverbed where they don't see it. Where it quite possibly from where they've dumped it will end up somewhere on one of our beaches. And then there's plenty occurrences in Africa, but I believe it is starting to become more and more of a problem in Europe and America as well, where people say, I don't like the smell of my food container in the car, and I just throw it out the window. We had a nice picnic in the park. I don't want to carry all this stuff back home, and I just leave it where I am. Now, one can talk about this a lot. I've tried to put it in a schematic representation. So on the left-hand side here, you have the formal guys. And currently what's happening to my waste is the double line here. So there's a truck from the local municipality that takes it to landfill. In South Africa, we have then waste pickers. Those guys, some of them collect it from the bin, but in most cases, these waste pickers working on the landfill, collecting the recyclables. They sell it to someone with transport. He takes it to an area where it gets compacted in big bales, and those bales get loaded on trucks and taken to the reprocessors or the recyclers. But we also know that in the case of poorly managed waste, where the landfill is not well managed, or it just ends up somewhere in a pile outside the town, there are waste pickers servicing that area as well. But the bulk of that stuff will probably just end up in the environment because it's not contained, there's not a fence around it, it's just poorly managed. The stuff that's dropped in rivers and waterways, the chance that they will actually get picked by waste pickers results. So you can see there's no line going that way, it just goes straight to the environment. And then you have the whole litter aspect, where people just leave it on the pavement or in the park, and that ends up in the environment as well. And then there's leakage. These trucks are not always covered, and there's some wind-blown stuff. The waste pickers, we know, wherever they sort, they take out what they're not going to get, and that can end up in the environment as well. Even in well-managed landfills, we know there's material that is leaking from the system. So if one look at, before we can say we need to manage waste, we really need to look at where does the waste come from? Where's the origin of the stuff? And each of these actually have challenges and solutions of their own. So if we design a system to deal with waste, and we only look at the formal waste management system, there's a whole pile of waste that's going to fall outside our net. And that's true for any of these ones. And it reminds me of these little Rubik cubes that we've all have played with. And you can say, well, this is the solution. In my case, I take the Rubik cube and I turn all sorts of solutions, but it just stays all muddled up. And often in our waste management systems that we design, it looks like we're making the right moves, but it just remains quite muddled up. So my agenda for the next couple of minutes is really the introduction, which we just dealt with now, and then look at the different plastics, how many of that is there in the world or in the area out there, and then really the main topic of the theme of my talk this afternoon is what to do for what materials. And please put your questions and comments in the questions and answer session. Just to remind us, this is why we're here, because these things occur regularly, and it's really not a long-term solution whatsoever. So what do we need to do to make sure that doesn't happen? Because as we see in that little schematic drawing now, from formal landfill, informal landfill, littering, dumping, plastics is going to end up where we don't want them. And you speak to certain people and they say, oh, duh, recycle more and you won't have a problem anymore. And I'm just saying, I don't believe that is so simple. Recycling alone is definitely not going to help us here. So if one look at the current value chain for recycling, and yes, this is a South African one. So I'm taking that complicated picture I had earlier on and just pull the recycling value chain out. So from my bin to the contractor or the municipality or the council, taking it to landfill, the waste picker collects it from the landfill, give it to someone with transport, compacting it, and it ends up with a reprocessor. So just from a terminology point of view, we refer to this middle section where things are all still mixed and in a loose format. We call that then collection. And once it's really getting baled and sold on, we call that part recycling. So I think even if you start designing a system for your own area or your region, you need to make dead sure, are you talking collection or are you talking recycling? Now, we can't recycle if we haven't collected, but often people stop at this stage and they say, okay, I have made sure all my plastics is now together, all my cardboard is together, all my glass is together, but we haven't actually thought, what now? So these two things do go hand in hand, and one need to look at our solutions with both together. Most of my time today is actually spent on this side, on the collection side, because once it is collected, it's a sellable product. Or I hear the economy guys talk about a bankable product. In other words, now someone is prepared to take out money and take that product and turn it, make a better product from that. So we need to get our waste into a bankable format. And that is what this collection is really about. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, will increased recycling rates reduce plastic in the environment? So that photo, the plastic on the beach, and I don't believe it will help, but it's definitely not all we can do. So if one looking at South Africa in 2019, and some of you attended Doe Stein's talk last week, I think he uses the same stats because it is the official stats from Plastics in South Africa. We recycle a good fair amount of the plastics we locally manufacture, turn into products. We export small portion, which is where we differ quite a bit from other Western countries, where they collect and then sell it somewhere else. I'm just recently, like yesterday, became aware of even more challenges for the people that do export this less than 0.5%, because with the Basel Convention now, they need certain acceptance and documentation, even from the country where it's going to. And if that's not in place by the time it's loaded on the ship in South Africa, our local Department of Environmental Affairs stop the container and says, and at the moment now, the specific guy have now criminal charges against him for what's the right word, contravening the Basel Convention. So yeah, I think we're in the beginning stages. It was only signed in January this year. So there are some challenges. Of all the plastics that we have in the country that could be recyclable, we collected 45%, what we call in South Africa the input recycling rate. But yet, this is really the challenge, is this red line at the bottom. There's still a lot that is not somewhere in this collection system. So these products in the bottom here, this 1 million is not yet a bankable product. So we can't make money from it. So what is the most popular material for recycling in South Africa? And that is, and again, unusual for the Western world, but I believe relatively common in Africa. It's the soft plastic. So the low density polyethylene. So that is the stuff we use for our breads. You buy bread rolls, or if you buy a nice 6-pack with beer or Coca-Cola or Pepsi, it will be wrapped in low density polyethylene. And tonnage wise, that is actually the biggest. Out of that 350,000 tons, 120, so what is that, 40+% is actually soft plastic. The other one that's very high on the list, and they do incredibly good marketing, is the cool drink bottles, or what they call carbonated soda drinks, and then the water bottles. Clear bottles are really the prime product here. On the high density side, drums, milk bottles, this is the top product. It's actually more in demand currently than PET. And then you have other bottles, closures, crates. These are not the only products, but these ones are, I think, something we can all identify with. Then on the polypropylene side, the tubs, so margarine, cottage cheese, ice cream, those are very popular. We only recently, like in the last 3-4 years, we have processors now that can deal with woven polypropylene, non-woven polypropylene, and even metallized films. PVC is not really packaging. There they recycle quite a bit of footwear and cables. And then polystyrene is a mixture of stuff from coat hangers, yogurt containers, and there's a special project in South Africa on bread tags, where people can bring a certain volume of bread tags. I think it's a kilogram, which is quite a lot. And then the bread companies are matching the value of that, and someone can get a wheelchair. They refer to the project as tags for wheelchairs. And the actual volumes they collected is not that much, but it definitely created an awareness. And we'll see, for me, that part is quite important if we want to manage our waste. So if one specifically look at packaging, and this is where the world is talking, this is why United Nations is involved, that's why there is an Abidjan Convention, and we have marine plastics in South Africa quite active, and it's really all about packaging, because packaging is so visible. And we can see here our low-density polyethylene is predominantly packaging. So that's popular. HD, PT, polypropylene, and then polystyrene being a challenging material to transport. And then PVC packaging is very little, but we also recycle only very little. Now, this is measured on output rates. The moment your local government starts getting involved and your national government, they use different terminology. And I think that's why I've included these specifically, because in Europe, they talk a lot about collection rates or input recycling rates. In the South African government now, with our new extended producer responsibility, they are talking about an output recycling rate. And it's important actually that there's an agreement how you measure it. So if you're setting up management programs in your region or in your town, or very localized just in your suburb, you need to say, we need to monitor it, because you need to know, are you making progress? And in agreeing on the methodology, how are we going to measure this, if how successful we are? And that is really one of the stumbling blocks, because if you want to compare yourself with another town, that terminology needs to be the same. So why are we not recycling more? And I think we're all really wondering about that. And there are a whole variety of questions there. And before we get there, I think what Tony lifted out when he introduced me is we have different materials. And this is just a variety, and it's really pictures I had, and that's why I put this collage together. It's not really favoring a specific brand or anything. But if you just look at the packaging around our food, and this is really, I think, all food packaging. Yeah, there's one little Vaseline jar here. Your next step, so you've collected the materials and now you're going to manage it. You need to have different solutions. And if I look at the bottom here, for a multi-layer unbreathable film around your processed meat than for your edible oil bottle. Your home care Vaseline jar is different than the jar or the tray that you buy your tomatoes in. Your honey jar is a totally different plastic than the custard box that you have here. So you can just imagine the challenges around in managing all of these different materials, because you cannot all throw them on a pile and say, let's recycle. And in plastics, that's probably the single biggest reason, if we think the question was, why are we not recycling more? And one of the simplest answers is there are just too many different types of plastics. Why don't we make everything only using one material? Because they have different properties. In the case of the plastic on the inside of the paper for your sugar, it's purely there as a waterproofing layer and to make the paper bag sealable. So you use little heat and there's your bag sealed. I can't use that same plastic for my meat here because in this case I need an oxygen barrier. I don't want my meat to go off so quickly. So it's a different, even this little Mentos here, I can't use that or this plastic because I need to keep the flavor inside. I don't want everything else in my cupboard to smell like Mentos, or I don't want the coffee that's in my cupboard to flavor to go to my Mentos, and the next moment, maybe that's nice, I open my peppermint and I taste coffee instead of peppermint. So each of these ones have a reason for why that plastic was selected. If one look at South Africa, and again, it's easy because this is the stuff I know. In 2019, the products made in South Africa. Now, I know a lot of the West Africa and North Africa and Central Africa, a lot of plastics is actually imported into your country. Or in the case of Nigeria, I know there's quite a strong local plastics industry. So if we take material that's either locally manufactured, because we have Sasol polymers in South Africa, or that it was imported. These are the materials that was used to make products now, so chairs or bread bags or ice cream tubs. And if you can see, we're really talking 5, and we talk about common plastics. These 5 materials are most represented, more than 80%. Not all of them are used for packaging, right? Because packaging is only about half of what we manufacture in South Africa. But these are the common plastics. And that's also important, because if you're going to set up a waste management system and you're going to pick, and let's just use this little pink line here, which in this case is ABS. You're going to say, I'm going to set up a recycling waste management method for ABS. You're not going to get enough to start off with. The volumes is very low, and therefore the volume of the waste is going to be very low. So if I look at this graph and I say, well, where do I start looking at waste? I'm definitely going to tackle the 2 big ones first. So this is the soft plastic used for the bread bags and the 6-pack, or this was the one using for the chocolates, the woven plastics, or your margarine tubs. Because I know I'm making so many products in South Africa, so therefore that waste will be relatively common, available. Every town will have enough of these materials to justify the cost of setting up a recycling business. So one of your first steps would be looking in your region. May not be what you manufacture in that region, but what are the materials available in your waste stream, because that will impact on which process you set up. South Africa is tiny in the world market. We're less than 0.5% of the rest of the world if we talk plastics, which can be a plus or a minus. I think for me the positive side was we're so small, we're relatively far away from Europe or America or China, and we had to find solutions in South Africa for our own waste. Today that's our advantage, because we don't depend on a Chinese or Indian market for our waste. I couldn't find a world picture, so this is just a Europe picture to see. Now this looks pretty complicated, but what are we looking at is, if we take the soft plastic, we looked in South Africa. This was this one here, which is used for the bread bags and the 6-packs. This is the same material in the very top row here for Europe. In Europe here we're talking EU 28 plus 2, so Switzerland and Norway included. So if you see here, this is all the polyethylene used. The most of it ends up in packaging, because this is your column for packaging. But we see there's also a bit sitting, and I can't see my headings, but sitting in this column here. If you look at something like PET, the Coke bottle plastic, that's predominantly packaging. In actual fact, Europe says the rest is so small we don't even indicate it. If you take a smaller material, let's take, where's a tiny one? There's acrylics. Now that would be the perspex. We use them for spectacles, glasses, and we use them for some signages. And you can see, to start off a recycling process for perspex, it's not going to make sense. This is the whole of Europe. It's not going to make sense in a small town in Africa. So if you want to include perspex, you rather find someone that will buy it from you. So you'll set up someone in China or India and say, how do you want this perspex waste? How do I get it to you? Because your magnitude of the waste is just not enough. And that's really the reason for this picture. If you focus on packaging, we know the advantage of that is the material becomes available pretty quickly. If you look at something like agriculture, the product is probably spent in the sun, in the veld, at a windmill for a long time. Fishing nets we regard as agriculture as well. by the time they actually get back to the recycler, they're sun damaged, they're full of algae growth, and they're more difficult to recycle. Where packaging, it's really used within a day or a week, it's available for recycling. So one must remember that different plastics are used for different applications. So you can see polypropylene is popular for recycling because it's a packaging plastic, but it's used in building and construction. It's used in automotive. It's used in agriculture. It's really across the board. And you can recycle them together because they're probably the same type of polypropylene as well. And then we mustn't forget about bioplastics. Now, bioplastics, we have the area, the blue arrow here, and I put here biodegradable. Those are the ones that's bio-derived, so they starch and PLA, and they're biodegradable. In other words, they're not good for recycling. And you have the non-biodegradable ones, which is bio-based. In other words, we use plant material to manufacture them, but they can be recycled. So we probably have to include these volumes. Now, they're tiny. In 2019, it was just over 0.5%, but they're growing quite quickly. It's a small base, but the public and the consumer love it. They want more of it. So in looking at a total picture like this, I'm foreseeing that in the next year or two, you will start seeing on the same list here, you will see the biodegradable bioplastics and the non-biodegradable bioplastics, because they're pretty much still regarded as a family of plastics, because not one of them is actually big enough to start appearing on the big consumption graphs. So if we just put our minds together, we're saying waste or plastic waste specifically come from different sources. Remember, we said they could be from the formal system, they could be the dumped stuff in our rivers, it could be badly managed or poorly managed systems, or it could be litter. Now we're saying there's many different types of plastics. Some of them, there's a lot of it, and some of them, there's only tiny volumes. Then we have material that's common in packaging, so that they come through the system quite quickly. So once I get a milk bottle, it's about a week old. If I start looking at automotive bumpers, the bumper could be, if I take my own car, 12 years old already, before it's going to become available as a recyclable material. So your engineering products is much smaller. And what are we really saying is, I don't have the the guts to give you a single way of dealing with your waste, because there's no ways that one solution will fit all. And I'm glad I'm not this little girl in the middle here. So how do we manage? What are the actions that we can do to manage our plastics waste and our different plastic waste? So if one look at this slide here, that's those 4 origins or sources of waste. So we need to take into account, is it small pieces that I need to gather all across town, or is it a big bulk that people put on a specific day out for collection? Is it stuff that's already on a pile, but they poorly managed, they sun damaged, or is it stuff that ends up or coming from my rivers or my beaches? Then this one is quite complicated, especially if we haven't done any counting or measurement. The popular high in demand material. So in South Africa, I don't think crates ever even make it to landfill because the recyclers, the collectors wanted to store things in. Once it's damaged, the recyclers see it's easy, it's big, it's bulky, it's quick to recycle and get some good return. The same for milk and cool drink and water bottles. Polypropylene and soft plastics in your own town area, may only be in demand in certain areas. If we take South Africa, in Cape Town, there's hardly anyone recycling woven polypropylene. In Johannesburg, we have about 6 recyclers, and in KwaZulu-Natal, we have about, which is the east coast of South Africa, we have about 20, I think, people recycling them. But if you're living in a part of the country where there is not a recycler, these materials is not going to be popular. Polystyrene is sitting with that challenge currently, where it is very low demand. There's only like 2 main projects making bricks out of polystyrene. They need more, but to transport it from far outlying areas is just not happening. So the demand for these materials are incredibly low. And then there's products where there's absolutely no demand. And predominantly here we're talking multi-layers. We need to add a third layer to these things is, what does it look like? Is it clean industrial waste? Now, the photograph here on the screen is from a company making fridges and freezers. And in their manufacturing process, they have beautifully white material. You don't need washing. Some of it's already cut into pieces. Or it can be quite dirty, but it comes from a single agricultural co-op, or it comes from a factory making soap. So it's dirty, it's full of soap, but there's a lot of drums. They all look the same. They're all the same format. Or it could be material coming out of my bin. Now, my domestic bin has quite a variety of material in it. And because there's other stuff in there, leftover food and maybe even some dog poo, it becomes very dirty. And then we have products that is tiny, like those Mentos wrappers or earbud sticks. So what I want you out there is to have a look for me at slide 33. So read carefully through them and then pick the most appropriate one here. Okay, so we're saying the local council collects it, which is great and easy, and you don't actually have to worry about it. We have then the second group says the council collects it, but we actually don't know where it's going. And then there's a group that says they separate it and they sell it to a contractor. Well, I'm impressed, 17%. Would that be mainly South Africans or the people from other countries in here as well?
There should be a bit of a range, but if people want to send through the country they're joining us from today in the chat, that would be great.
Thank you. And then there's only 8% of the people that responded that says they've actually have followed their own waste and they know exactly where it's going. And I want to encourage that because it is actually great that you know where it's going. What is nice to see is that no one on this chat have no facilities, and no one on this chat needs to take it to a communal dump or a communal area. So yes, we're all very privileged then where we are, because the majority of us have a service. But in designing your own system, you need to take into account exactly that. Perfect. So you can pick as many as you like from this list. And a couple of you said that you separate your waste and that you actually know where your waste is going, as well as that you know the council is taking it to a formal landfill area. And again, if once we over 50%, we can share the results. Is it like Mendy that it will keep on changing as people add more their vote?
So depending on the answers, yes, they will change. But I think we've got more than 50% now, so I'll share them in a minute.
Yeah, and as it's then changing, it's great. So if you don't stop voting, if you haven't yet. Cool drink and water bottles, very popular. Milk bottles, popular. Milk and juice cartons, that's an interesting one. Only a few of you in the area where they take polystyrene. Polypropylene is quite common. Wow, and plastic is actually, there's the last one that's not aware of anyone taking recyclables. That's nearly a quarter of the votes, which is actually quite high. Interesting. So 23% of people said that they actually don't know. And then no one have selected the option to say that other stuff gets taken, but not plastic. So even if we just have to take these 24 of us in the call today, and we need to pick or design a waste management system for us, we'll have to do different combinations. And I really just use this to show that it can be quite complicated. So if one look at now, let's assume, because a big percentage of you, and now I've closed the slide, so I don't know, but I think it was like 70% of you says there is a bin. You have a system, so a nice formal system, and a lot of you says milk bottles and cool drink bottles are in high demand. Now this is the easy one, where you're really saying, if we're in an environment where this is already taking place, if it's very dirty and contaminated, doesn't actually matter, because we have the volume. So a typical waste management system in an area where you have formal collection and there is someone taking the popular materials, you probably will have waste pickers that select either directly from the bins or from landfill. They then, the waste pickers is capable of selling it to buyback centers. Could be a fixed buyback center in a specific area, or in South Africa, we're looking more and more at mobile buyback centers. They actually come to the waste rather than the other way around. If we have this system, we can really start selling the concept of design for recycling. You can tell the people, listen, in milk bottles, make sure that the label is loose and it comes off easily. And you can actually guarantee the milk producer, not the cow, the person putting it in a bottle, you can make sure that they understand the bottles are very popular and they need to do certain things. In scenarios like this, you can set recycling targets. You can say, we're implementing the system. Within a year, we want to be able to collect 50% of all our cool drink and water bottles. We want to collect 70% of all our milk bottles. You can even go further and say, now that we have enough cool drink and milk bottles, we can, as a region or as a local government, you can say, listen, every carrier bag, shopping bag must contain recycled content. Every crate that you manufacture in this town must contain the recycled content, because you actually know how much you're collecting, you can measure it, and you can put it back into the product. So there's value in that waste value chain, and that quite often manage itself then, because the person buying these popular materials prepared to pay enough money to actually fund the waste picker, to fund the guy that's bringing it to him. And contamination is actually not an issue. But let's just do the same thing, and we're saying, because in my bin, I have milk bottles and cool drink bottles, but I also have detergent packets, and that's in no demand. And so I'm following the same, I have waste pickers, but suddenly this is not going to work, because the waste picker is not going to pick the detergent bag. And now I have to start focusing and say, forget about the dirty and contaminated stuff. No one is going to take that. My system is not allowing for that. I need to say, let's start focusing on the clean industrial waste. So at least get that out of the system before it is dirty and contaminated. So now my system says, I have a formal system. I'm looking at the materials that's not so popular, and I need to get them out of the system before they get to landfill, while they're still clean. And a typical waste management system for this would be that you have formal companies. So you have a contractor that deals with industrial waste. So where I fill my soap bags, or at big laundries where I use a lot of them, I have someone there that comes and collects it. And I'm paying him for that service because I don't know what to do with my detergent bags. So I'm the manufacturer, in this case Unilever, and Unilever says we have a lot of these at our factory. Please, Mr. Waste Man, you come and fetch it. You take everything. Don't tell me there's too much soap or anything. I'll pay you to do that. Then we can implement what the government call extended producer responsibility fees that says, but someone needs to pay to do something with this now. So Mr. Unilever, because we know there's no demand for your stuff, you have to pay Wasteman to remove it, but you also need to pay like a penalty fee because Mr. Wasteman have to find a solution for this particular product. And that's the only way we're going to make sure it's not lying in the environment or it's not lying on landfill. And Mr. Wasteman then says, with that money, I can build park benches, or I can build school desks, or animal feeding troughs, because I now have money in the system to actually pay for the manufacturing of these mixed plastic solutions. So let's say we're talking Coke bottles. Don't worry, I won't do all. I think there's 96 different combinations. I'm looking at different scenarios more than that. But let's look at something like Coke bottles. And milk bottles, we know they're very popular, but they're not in my bin. They're actually lying in the river. And you people living in Port Elizabeth have seen it in the Swartkops channel. We've seen it in all of our cities. In Johannesburg, we have it in the Henops River, the Yexkay River. We have it in the Umgeni River in Natal. So your solution now, a waste picker is not going to walk the river banks and collect it. The waste man, the formal contractor, is not going to walk the river bank or swim the river to collect this stuff. So here I need a different solution again. And often it says we need to develop a catchment system. We know this stuff is all lying scattered along the river. How do we catch it in a specific point? And the river booms have proven to be quite popular in South Africa. In this case, you can see it's there. It's like a netting thing. This is in the Umgeni River in Natal. But the big question then is, who's going to do it? Who's going to actually make that pipe or that floating device or the cage to put it in? Once it's in there, someone has to manage it, because we know if it's rainy season, it rains every day. So your boom is going to be full today, and tomorrow someone needs to empty it again. Tomorrow night it rains, and you need someone the next day to empty it. And maybe there's then 4 or 5 months in non-rainy season where it's not happening. So someone needs to fund then that empty, that servicing thereof. Once we then have the stuff, we need to sort it and actually split it into, and we assume in this case there's many popular materials, and actually if you zoom in, you'll see there are incredibly many cold drink and water bottles in this mix. But you can't stop there, because you can't keep on putting litter booms and clean them. So in a system like this, you need a very strong education and awareness. And Sustainable Seas Trust is involved in those education and awareness in Port Elizabeth, for example. Because how do you tell people upstream not to throw it in the river? But the moment we get this and it's incredibly dirty and contaminated, suddenly it doesn't matter if it's in high demand or not. No one wants it, because no one will actually sit there and sort through bottles, which is full of sea sand and all the other yuck that's on it. And if I sit with material that's in very low demand, like polystyrene, this system is not going to pay for itself either. So if I'm sitting in a river, which is full of low demand plastics, very dirt plastics, I can tell you now the cost of sorting and transporting it will kill the system immediately. So my standard river boom, someone servicing it, someone sorting it, selling that material to pay for his fuel. If the material is not in demand, boom, voila, dead. It's not happening. So what are we saying? Every single scenario needs to have a different solution. And often people say, no, oh shucks, this is too complicated. I'm not even going to start. Because if I design a system for cool drink bottles, what do I do with my styrene? If I design the system for clean material from the factory, what do I do with my dirty material? And I'm really saying, instead of waiting, just start chiseling away. Even if you have one system in one little street, there's 5 streets joining 100 houses, started in that area and just roll it out bigger and bigger. But if we wait to have the perfect solution, in 10 years' time, our beaches will look worse and we haven't made any progress. So just start a little small area and change it and do something in that area. And you often need to put your thinking cap on, because in your specific area, what is the waste? Is it very dirty? What is the income of the people in your area? Can they afford actually bringing it to a spot for free, or do you need to pay them for that? So if one try and summarize this, and I'm sure all of your minds are now wish you have a thinking cap, but if one look at a formal system, we're really saying we need to combine the high demand materials with the less popular materials. Because if you have a system and all the milk and cool drink bottles is out, it's not going to pay to come and collect the styrene and the sweet wrappers. So we need to find a method of combining that. So it becomes really a cross-subsidizing. And then you need to, I don't want to use the word force, so I selected contract here. You need to contract your pickers to say, I don't want you only to take Coke bottles, you must also take wrappers and polystyrene. So if everything is in one spot, it may work better. And this is where this proposed value chain is coming from, is from that thinking. So we're saying, Mr. Consumer, we want you to help us here. So we need to separate your dry and your wet. We'll take a truck that the wet goes to landfill or to a composting facility, and the dry goes to a beneficiation. Now this picture looks quite fancy. I mean, there's a front end loader and there's belts and people, but this can be a big cement slab with some shade. And you're saying, pickers, you come here. You're not allowed to go here. We'll have someone policing that. But in here, you come in. You sign up at the door and you can come and pick as much as you like, as many as you like. But 5 o'clock when the sun sets, you need to bring your stuff to the buyback center. So it would be a mobile buyback center, and we will refund you for what you've picked. So what is the advantage? All the small little bits that no one wanted to collect, those little corners we tear off our sachets, those little broken pieces coming off toys, they're all in one spot. And now we can deal with it. So sunset, we chase the waste pickers off. We then have a contractor that says, well, here's now for you 3 tons of mixed rubbish. And suddenly 3 tons of mixed rubbish can be dealt with. We can burn it for diesel. We can burn it for energy to warm up some water for steam. We can even make bricks out of it. But I don't have to go and bend down and pick it up one by one. They're in one spot. So the principle says high values and low value and no value are all in one spot, and it can be managed. What are we doing with areas where there isn't a formal system? Solutions that work very well in South Africa is where you provide a service. So you contract a service provider And in most cases, it's little entrepreneurial companies, and you say you help them, you fund the little buyback center. So in this case, it's a truck and a trailer with a baler, and there's a scale, and they actually pay people. So only there on certain days, Tuesday afternoon, 2 o'clock. The truck arrives, everyone is already lined up with their material. It gets weighed, they get their money directly onto their cell phones, which in Africa is quite a normal method of paying people. And the truck then sorted, bale it, and it moves to the next step or next place, next township. But this is only going to be for popular materials, because I'm not going to carry a lot of weight for material that I get like no money for. So if we want to make this to work, we have to put a value on the styrenes and on the really small things. And the value of that waste is not going to pay for the system. So somewhere you need to get that money from. In South Africa, we just implemented now, it's kicked into full operation in November this year, where every producer is paying money towards that. Now, that is what this money will typically be used for, is how do we pay for the less popular, so that these people are bringing that as well, and not only the margarine tubs and their Coke bottles. And that's absolutely a must. You could also set up entrepreneurs to say, everyone living in this area, but what about this river at the back there? Or what about that open felt area? So if you will collect there, I'll help you with transport, and you bring it on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 o'clock, and I'll pay you. But this needs outside funding, because the value of the waste is not going to cover everything. So this is for these areas where there are really not formal regular services. So we're saying you provide a service, you need to look at the or less popular material. You help small guys to set up little bicycle businesses, but you also need to deal with the rubbish, because I don't have a bin. If I'm in a mismanaged area, at the moment I hide in the bottom of my bin, I hide the really, it's grass clippings, or it's old t-shirts or whatever that I don't know what to do with it. And your system needs to make provision for that. And one solution, and we've tried this here in the Northwest Province near Brits, where we say the service provider puts up a big skip. There's no money for this. It simply says, when you bring your Coke bottles and your margarine tubs, also put your other rubbish in a bag and come and throw it in here. And the local council, instead of cleaning the streets now, come and give us a clean skip once a week or once every day, or how often it gets filled. But you must make it easy, and that's what we're saying here. Setting up processes, it really must be simple. What I didn't add in here is compostables. Because I know they were talking about this in one of the places in the Western Cape, to say, yes, you bring your rubbish and you throw it in there, but we also give you a little bucket. And I think in their case, it was a 10-liter bucket that can seal tightly. And in there, you put your food waste. Knowing poor areas in Gauteng, I think people will just leave their food waste at home, because either the animals eat it or they have little garden setups. But don't take that for granted. You also need to see, if there's no service in that area, how do people deal with the organic waste? I know in some really poor places that they put that in their outside toilets, which is obviously not the right thing to do. So we need to give people a facility for that. So what do we do with discarded waste? And I think we said that already. You need to provide a service, and you need to make sure that service gets the service gets serviced. So you have interventions to come and clean it. Part of that education, we spoke about it, is Tell people that they can generate value. So instead of throwing it in the sea, help people to set up buyback centers, help people to set up craft centers. And suddenly that plastic bag has some value, and hopefully tomorrow we don't have to come and collect it from the river boom again. So you really need to put those thinking caps on and say, how do we make sure it happens? How do we prevent it? And this is the one where I don't have a picture, because I think that's the challenge question. How do we prevent people from throwing it in the river? Yes, we've done the training, we've added value to it, we help them with a buyback center, but will it really stop people from littering? I'm not convinced. Now I'm just about finished, and we have time for lots of discussion and questions. We need to develop alternatives to recycling. Remember, we start off by saying recycling alone is not going to help us. So high value stuff, clean stuff, industrial waste, but what do we do with those tiny pieces and mixed stuff and all of that? And I really have three categories here, which is all tiny in South Africa, and I believe even smaller in the rest of Africa. But these are the options how we can grow this. One is to mix it with cement. This lady at the bottom here, I've seen some pictures of someone in Kenya doing it as well, where they take mixed plastic. It goes through a machine. There's some capital requirement to make it like a glue, so you don't have to melt it totally. Mix it with sand, and you turn it into bricks. And they look like bricks. You can plaster them. They feel like bricks because the sand component of it is quite high. The plastic glue the sand together in essence. The top picture here is with polystyrene. There's one company that's now in about 6-7 towns in South Africa, where he takes dirty polystyrene trays, he hammer mills it and mix it with a special glue and cement, and he makes this beautiful bricks. And these houses are nice and cool because the polystyrene provides some insulation. This middle picture is plastics mixed with bitumen or tar for our roads. This is still being researched because personally I'm concerned. I'm not convinced that as the cars drive over this road, pieces of plastic is not going to wash off. So CSIR, the company that Linda Godfrey works for, they're busy with a trial specifically to see if big trucks goes over it, if small trucks go over it. They have a section that they test with heavy traffic. In other words, these really trucks driving up and down on it, just to see how much plastic do come off. Then there's the chemical processes. I've just attended a conference where someone from Europe talked to us about depolymerization. In other words, making chemicals again from plastics. I think that's great if we have lots of plastic of the same kind. We're not privileged like that in Africa. We have a mix match and less volume. But in East London, there's a company making shoe polish and solvents currently. So if you ever made mampoer, we call it in Afrikaans. I don't actually know what it's called in English, definitely not in French. But that you distill the fruit and you get the alcohol off, and then you condense the alcohol back to a liquid. This pyrolysis process works in the same manner. So you chuck in a whole lot of plastic, you put a fire underneath it, and that fire could be yesterday's tar mixture that remains behind. And you boil the plastic, and then you pass it through a tube with cold water, and that's probably what's happening on this side. And the diesel condense, and you have fuel. So these are methods that you can do with that leftover fraction. Remember I said you take the valuables out, you take the less popular ones out, and the rubbish that remains you can now turn into shoe polish or solvents or diesel. You can also make products from it, and again, you need equipment here. And these ones, I put a couple of websites here, so when you get the presentation, you can have a look at them. This company at the bottom here take toothpaste tubes, and he mixes it now. He's trying it with chips packets. He's trying it with chocolate wrappers, and he warms it up. It's not melted. It's just nice and warm, and you have a huge press compacting it. And he makes these beautifully smooth boards, and it's good for school desks. It's good for tabletops. He's selling a lot of that also as roof sheeting because it's plastic, it's waterproof, and it's nice and smooth. Dust don't stick to it. There's a guy in Natal making little fencing. There's a guy in Johannesburg making little dollies, these trolleys that you can put under cars or under heavy loads. And this is really the area where we need to find local solutions. So if I'm a small town and there's only Coke bottles and milk bottles recycled in my town, everything that is not a cool drink bottle or a milk bottle will end up making something here. At the moment, I just love the thing around the bricks. It doesn't have to be housing bricks, but imagine if we make little paver stones. And especially in our poor areas, we can build beautifully walkways for the children to get to school or to cover wet areas with these little paver blocks. So there are really solutions. We just need to think about it. This is literally my second last slide. All of it I spoke so far is really downstream ideas, and one can probably workshop this many more days and come up with solutions. But what about upstream? Do we really need all this stuff? Do we need all the packaging? So in your own area, in your own town, in your own province or country, you need to say, do we need this? If it's unnecessary or it's too much, we don't need a box and a bag and another wrapping around porridge, for example. Let's get rid of that extra stuff and really become waste aware. A few of you said that you know exactly where your waste is going. Fantastic, good for you. But the rest of us don't actually know. We put it out and it's gone. So if you're really waste aware, you definitely won't fill your bath to overflowing levels. You don't dish up too much food that you have to scrape a lot of them. You won't leave taps running while you brush your teeth. And you definitely won't drive this massive big vehicle to go and buy milk or bread at the nearest cafe. Because if we waste aware, we think the whole time is, do I need to be so wasteful? Talk about it, education, awareness, talk about your friends, talk about your children, tell them, you know, now you're wasting. Do you know this is coming from petrochemical resources? Do you know how much petrochemical resources, how much water was used to make things? We can't actually train enough, and talk about it is also doing. Get kids involved, get citizens involved. Often doing talks at little women's group or church groups and saying, how can we fix it? Let's come up with solutions for that tiny bit that we chisel off. It doesn't have to be a big project. Oh, I'm going backwards. My apologies. I'm going forward again. Just do something. We can't walk away from a talk like this afternoon and saying, it was interesting. You need to go and make one change in your life tonight and saying, before I can change my community, before I can change my town, how do I change within myself? Even if it's just walking 10 meters of your pavement and picking up rubbish, you've already done something that's going to make you remember a lot of the stuff we were talking about. And thank you. I'm done. So let's hear from you people. Any comments and questions and anything?
Sorry, Annabe, it just took me a second to unmute. There have been a few comments in the chat box, but if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to send those through now. There were a few comments just mentioning where people are joining us from, and a question that says, do collectors exist in every country in Africa? I think that's referring to the waste collectors or recyclers or companies like that you referred to earlier.
I think the quick answer is obviously I don't know, because I haven't been in all the countries. But the moment waste is seen as having a value, the collectors will actually be immediately there. So you need to start somewhere and saying, how do we add a value? So and let's start with high value products, Coca-Cola, for example. So make contact with a Coca-Cola and saying, do you know if used Coke bottles is bought at all? And the moment you're aware of that, publish it. Make sure there's a sign up at your local school, at your local church, at your local town hall, and saying, do you know this company is actually paying money for Coke bottles? And you will see the collectors just start. And once they're collecting Coke bottles, they're going to ask you, what do I do with my water sachets? Which I see is the next question coming through. So even if you're not aware of a collector, I see that's Barbara, that tells me other people is not aware of a collector. So that could be your do something for today, is start phoning around, ask your local Coke distributors and saying, what do I do with my Pepsi and my Coca-Cola bottles? What do I do with my water containers? And just start, because the moment you have that awareness, the collectors will start.
Thanks, Annabe. And for those of our attendees joining from other countries outside of South Africa, please feel free to type through any comments you might have about how things operate in your particular country. We'd love to have your input. Otherwise, I don't see any questions here in the chat. Annabe, I wonder if you might go back to one of your earlier slides just to review the stats of the most sort of recycled plastics that you're aware of in South Africa. I think there was a graph earlier on. Yes. I just thought it might be useful to have that up again, just because I think often people wonder about this, so it's useful to have it up.
Yeah, and if this is the case in South Africa, I can tell you now it will definitely be the case in other African countries. Your brand may look different. You may not have a McCain vegetable bag, but you may have a rice bag, or you may have a maize meal bag, or a coconut bag. The same with our bread. Milk sachets. I must actually put a milk sachet up here as well. I see Henk post in the chat also about a water sachet. Those will all sit under this flexible plastic category. The challenging materials is here around the styrenes, the PVC and other. And if you need to start designing your own waste collection system in your region, don't start with those. Start with the easy ones, which is really these 4 big blocks: water bottles, cool drink bottles, soft plastic. I just call them bottles, because that's really your shampoo and your hand lotion and your Vaseline and chemical containers. They're all sitting here. And yes, in Africa, we use a lot of our bigger containers for water and food storage. But once they get damaged, they're ready for recycling, definitely. And then on polypropylene side, I think we all use tubs or big basins and stuff, which is also very popular. In South Africa, you can visit any recycler. There's broken toys, broken garden furniture, which are all just into the waste stream for recycling.
Thanks, Annabe. There's a comment here from Tony that says, Annabe is correct. There are countries or parts of countries in which there are no collectors because there are no industries to pay them for what they collect. Then there's a question that says, do you know any example of successful projects carried out with discarded waste, such as rivers, beaches, or ports? So
if I use, that one is the easy one. If I take, for example, KZN at the moment, or the Umgeni River, which is going to eThekwini, or Durban, as most of us call the town. There they really have there plenty rivers all ending up in the Durban harbour, and the litter is a huge problem there. They've actually started totally new, brand new, from scratch, a thing called the KwaMashu, which is the area beneficiation center, waste center. And they're saying, you know, we can sell the milk bottles and the water bottles, but the rest of the stuff is just too dirty. We collect them literally with front end loaders out of the river. We're not going to sit there and sort through them. So in that case, they put them through a hammer mill, they mill them into a powder, and they mix them. And strangely enough, they mix them with glass pieces, and they make bricks out of them, because they don't have a lot of sand. But if you mold glass fine enough, it is sand again. So they mix this mixed rubbish with the sand particles and put them through a high temperature. And remember, the plastic will become the glue. And they at the moment they make pavers for walkways and roads. So that is a case of absolutely nothing. There was nothing there. And they say, to take this discarded rubbish, no one is going to pay for it. How do we make it into a valuable product? And so now they make pavers. And if you're in an area where money is really a problem, like in most of Africa, instead of then selling pavers, you can have a swap idea. People bring you rubbish, and I call them rubbish, obviously in this case now recyclables, even if you're not going to recycle it into new plastic, and you swap it then for some paver. So you bring me 2 kilograms of paver, plastics, I give you 1 kilogram of paver, and that other kilogram must pay for my machine. And that is from an absolutely nothing. There was nothing in that area, and now there's a center making pavers, and there's a visible decline in the rubbish in the river. So that's the one success story that I really just love, and I love talking about it because it's taking a difficult problem area and turn it into a product that adds value to people's lives.
Thanks, Annabe. There's a question in the chat that there's a comment saying thank you for your answer, and a question in the chat that says you've spoken a lot about what individuals can do to help set up and support recycling industry. From an action plan approach, other than separation at source, what support can government give to help support setting up recycling businesses?
I hope you're from government. Because I think one of the first things that government can do is provide space, because often individuals can collect or can separate, but what do they do with it then? And even right here in Johannesburg, we have individuals that have started, and then the moment they have a little pile, and I'm not talking huge mine heaps full of stuff, I'm really talking a small pile. The local government comes and say, no, you're illegal, please move away from the site, which often hamper. So government can provide the space, or the fancy language we'll talk about infrastructure, to say for every 100 houses, we keep this piece of field. We put a fence around it. We control the access in the sense that vagrants can't go and sleep there and live there. And this is where you bring your recyclables, because the moment there's volume, and I think that's true for the question around if you're in a country or area where there's no collection, the moment you have volume, you have more than one black bag full of recyclables, it has value. So if government gives space, and then your next step would be for government to help with that education process of saying, yes, please bring your stuff to this house or to this yard, and we build it from there. Obviously, the best government can do is to make sure there is a regular service, and there's a place people can take their rubbish as well as their recyclables. But I think if you're a government that had no waste management so far, even that can be too much. So you need to step in smaller steps and saying, let's get the community to start, but we'll make the space available. We allow them to be here. We're not going to charge them rent for this piece of ground. We'll make it a safe area where people can bring their material to be sorted.
Thank you, Annabe. I don't see any more questions available at the moment, but if anyone does have any questions after the session, you're welcome to email us at webinars@sstafrica.org.za, or Annabe had her email address available in the last slide, should you wish to contact her directly. For now, I think we can perhaps wrap up here for today. And thank you so much, Annabe, for the wonderful presentation. It's great to hear all your expertise, and thank you so much to everyone for joining us this afternoon. We really value the time that you've taken out of your day to attend with us.
No, big pleasure, and thank you for the opportunity again, Tara.
Of course. Our sessions were recorded and they will be uploaded to our YouTube page at a later stage. So you can look out for those, and you should receive an email once they've been uploaded.
Fantastic, and thank you for everyone that listened to all of this, and hopefully you have some ideas now what you can start doing in your immediate environment, as a club, as a local government, as a school. Don't think that you're too small an entity as yourself or your school or your group of friends to start doing something.
Thank you,
Annabe, from me too. Thank you very much indeed, and I will definitely do something.
Even in your flat in PE. Good, Tony. only a shorter shower, hey?
Shower?
Okay, smaller bucket in which you wash. I think if you're not showering or bathing, you're already doing a good part to the environment.
Thank you, Annabe. We look forward to working with you again, and yeah, thank you again for the wonderful presentation. Thanks, everyone, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone.